Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is Mohammed Basha. He's he is the author and producer of the Basha Report, also a business and intelligence OSINT analyst, and we'll talk a little bit about his background as well. Today we'll be discussing important regional dynamics and transformations, ranging from the Houthis, their activity, and the impact of the recent Israeli airstrikes, which reportedly killed the prime minister and a number of other senior officials, to the dynamics reshaping maritime security, and of course, the interesting pivot in the dynamics between eastern Libya, governed by Haftar, and Turkey, which has previously been an adversarial power backing Tripoli. But that is starting to change. What does that mean? How are there connections between these events? How are these things going to be shaping the near future of the region? All of these things we'll touch on today and more. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we launch into a litany of substantive discussion points, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, what brings you into this area, how you came to produce your report, and why what interests you in this specific regional aspect.
Thank you for hosting me. I am a proud Yemeni American, and being that my interest in the Middle East and in the region was just part of my DNA. When I moved to Washington, D.C., actually a month before 9/11. And when 9/11 happened, I was starting my master's program at George Mason University in School of Public Policy. And that sort of shaped my interest in national security, foreign policy, and international relations. I've spent, the past decade working with the Navanti Group, working on food security projects and working on OSENT. And in November of last year, I decided that I'm gonna, start my own advisory, and I just named it Basha Report because that was my LinkedIn and X handle, and I thought it was just gonna be an easier transition than coming up with another fancier name, and so that's basically my identity online, and I just wanted to make it more of a professional setup. The Arab Spring is what got me more interested in focusing on Sudan and focusing on Libya and focusing on Egypt. And it's me and many other Middle East experts here in the city. And here we are today.
Thank you so much for joining us. Definitely a rich background, and definitely there's a lot going on now that's at least as remarkable as the events that have been in development for now over a decade: the Arab Spring, the Yemen civil war, and everything that has happened since. But you would think that things would calm down. They clearly have not, um, which is why I hope to bring a little bit of understanding to the public that's been trying to keep up with these events. So I want to start with the elephant in the room. We have seen major news coming out with the Israeli airstrikes that killed multiple Houthi ministers. By the way, not to be confused with the ministers of the Yemen government, and their chief of staff. What does the near term chain of command in Sana'a look like? And who would actually sign orders for maritime and missile operations now that all of these implementers of the Houthi leadership apparatus are gone?
Sure. Um, I strongly believe, and many other Yemen subject matter experts will agree with me, hopefully, is that the prime minister and the nine ministers that were killed, most of them were not members of the Houthi movement. They're not part of the Ansar Allah Quranic March Revolution, which is a play on the Islamic Revolution of Iran, but with a Zaydi Yemeni twist to it. And those who were killed in the strike were technocrats, members of other parties. They had nothing to do with military operations. They had nothing to do with the security operations. They were perhaps the softest, easiest target to strike. However, that doesn't mean it doesn't send a signal. It does send a very loud and clear signal. And for the past, since the summer of 2024, Israel focused on energy and transportation hubs, bombing the power stations of Ras Kathib and Hizyaz, bombing the Asr substation, fuel depots for the Yemen Petroleum Company in Sana'a and Hodeidah, bombing fuel depots and cement factories in Bajil and Hodeidah and Amran. And so this culminating into a switch or turn of events where now Israel is saying, we're gonna start going after your key leaders. And, there must have been good intelligence for you to know where, I mean, only today we're able, because of updated satellite imagery, to update the location of the strike. The location of the strike was in Hadda in the Sab'in district. It was not in the prime minister's office or in a government office. It was in a government linked office. So there must have been some intelligence for Israel to find out the timing, the location, who's there. And, maybe they were targeting the chief of staff of the Houthi armed forces, Mohammed, and he seemed to have survived two strikes so far, but apparently one of his staffers was there. So maybe the Israelis were tracking, and we've seen in the New York Times this week that one of the key methods Israel has been tracking officials in Iran and Hezbollah is tracking the cell phones of the bodyguards and the staff. So maybe Israelis, with their, well-known, established signal intelligence capabilities and infiltrating phone calls and, having the signal intelligence, were able to do it. So in the short term, I would argue that it shook the Houthis to the core because they were getting too comfortable. The Houthis were comfortable going out to events, hosting rallies, hosting meetings, being very public. And so now, they're going to have more of operational security, of not using internet connected phones. Many of the Houthi leaders, you see them, they have smaller, like older Nokia era analog phones that were not sort of digital, but not connected to internet phones, and being more cautious about public events. And I mean, they do feel safe clearly from today and yesterday and going to public busy places, but like hosting these public events where they're going to be an easier target. I think that's going to be the challenge. And so we just reported an hour ago that the nine ministers replacements were their vice ministers. And so in the Houthi government, whenever you have a technocrat or a non-Houthi member as a minister, his vice minister is either part of their political office of the Houthis, the Ansarullah Politburo office, or is a staunch loyalist. So in a way, Israel's airstrike has led to the promotion of these hardliners. So the deputy prime minister, who was a hardliner, is now the caretaker prime minister, and the vice ministers, who were hardcore, staunch loyalists, are now the ministers. So nothing is going to change from the dynamics of this government. In fact, even what we're hearing is like staffers within the minister's office have been replaced by the staffers and the teams that are coming up from the vice ministers. So when it comes to airstrikes and long-range drone strikes, one-way drone strikes to Israel, when in regarding to maritime operations, in regarding to the mid-range ballistic missiles launches to Israel, nothing's going to change. Day-to-day affairs, there's going to be more of tightening of security. We already saw the security crackdown yesterday. They raided the World Food Program offices and
Mhm.
besieged the UNICEF and UNHCR. 11 so far, maybe more have been detained. And it's unfortunate that the UN has become the usual suspects. So whenever there's a major security incident, the Houthis rush to detain UN staffers, locals, not foreign yeah, UN staffers, but local staffers, because they have that mindset that anybody who's linked to the outside world, i.e., someone working for an INGO, is an easier operative for espionage. And this is something that, if you read the history of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, they did the same thing. They worked hard to shut down the connection between Tehran and the outside world, and the Houthis are following the steps by shutting down the connections of the community in Sana'a with the outside world.
This mindset is understandable, and yet, from a security perspective, I do wonder how effective it actually is, given that the UN staffers, local or not, would not necessarily have the sort of intelligence to be able to share planned internal meetings, since their job is food distribution and local dynamics, but not necessarily internal security planning and such. Would any of them even have had access to that information? Wouldn't that mean that there were at least other moles involved in the chain of command if there was a human intelligence breach?
So from the Houthis' perspective, we know I've watched hours and hours of what they call and broadcast as confessions,
Hmm.
and most likely a lot of these confessions were forced upon. But the narrative is that the UN jobs is a front.
Hmm.
I mean, one of the just insane theories is that U.S. was killing Yemeni bees and the honey industry and through the U.S. aid program and to weaken Yemen. So this is a very common conspiracy theory that you would read and hear about, even in Sudan, even in third world countries, that the Western powers are coming in and killing the cows and livestock and the bees, and because they want us to be independent to their products and to produce. And so for the Houthis, it's not that it's like these guys are working in the UN as a front. That the UN is supporting Israel and the UN is an extension of US foreign policy. But also it's a shakedown because the UN did provide technical support to the Houthis that sometimes meant cash payments
Hmm.
to Houthi Sana'a-based institutions, which the UN does with all the other institutions, except the difference is it's complicated in Yemen because in Sana'a the government controls less than 30% of the territory, but it controls over 70% to 80% of the population. So you have to work, you have no choice but to sort of work with them because the internationally recognized government of Yemen is cut off from the Houthi areas. And this is the situation where you keep for them it's like you speak English, you interacted with the Westerners, with diplomats, you traveled, then you must be a suspect. So anyone from the Houthis' perspective who's not a member of the Houthi movement, who doesn't sound and act like them, and now you're gonna see more of that. Like sort of the core is in Sa'da Governorate. So anyone who's outside of the Sa'da Governorate, even there are former Houthi loyalists. An example of that is Ahmad al-Razihi, who was an aide to their former president, Saleh Samad, and he's from the region. But he opened an NGO and then he's locked up now. Nobody knows what's his whereabouts. So the Houthis do not discriminate just only against the UN, but anyone is a suspect to them. And I'm worried that they're gonna use the last Israeli strike as a reason to purge anyone in the security establishment, defense structures in the north that worked with the former president Hadi's government or the late Saleh government. and use it as an excuse to promote their staunch loyalists in this. And then we're already seeing that this week.
So the question is, from a security perspective, why weren't Houthis more situational aware or more concerned about Israeli intelligence gathering capabilities, given what happened with Hezbollah not so long ago? And second, why were they employing non-loyalists and technocrats to begin with? Wouldn't it have been safer to just staff their offices with their own closest people? But on the other hand, why were these technocrats joining the Houthi government? Wouldn't they have been more comfortable with the Yemen government or fleeing abroad or just staying out of politics altogether and not being a target?
So many of them live and were raised and have properties and family in Houthi-controlled areas.
Mhm,
So your alternative is to be self-exiled outside of Yemen or to live in the south where a lot of northerners are not welcome.
mhm,
So, it's a tough choice. And unfortunately, the Saudi UAE-led coalition and the government did not uh, do a very effective job in trying to recruit and bring out some of the officials from Sana'a. And some of those who came out were not rewarded publicly or sort of like disappeared. So it's not appealing for them to, lose your family, lose your home. Probably your home will be seized, your properties will be seized, and you'll be kicked out. And some started believing. The thing with the Houthi movement is it as an idea, agree with it or not, but it's an idea that's filling a vacuum. There's a vacuum of ideas in Yemen.
mhm.
And the Houthis were quick and smart in filling it up. And I did a full detailed report recently on my Substack and Basha report about the media apparatus. And, they're using music, poetry, rallies, radio, TV, print, changing the curriculum in school. It's a holistic, comprehensive plan and re-indoctrinating the society, and it's working. People, whether you like it or not, a lot of people say that. I know the Houthis, I think so far have maybe next week will be 100th rally in the Sab'in Parade Square in Sana'a since October 7, and like the 100th weekly speech by their leader, Abdel Malik al-Houthi, and it's just they're filling that vacuum. And as long as there's no strong counter messaging that's coming from the government, that's coming from the their regional allies and from the West, the Houthis will continue to grow. And we did a piece where Houthi chants and poetry now is remixed in EDM house DJ music. It's becoming trendy and hip. And a lot of these DJs are mixing these songs and they don't know what they're mixing. But it's just you go to YouTube and you're trying to, because Afro house and Arabic music now is trending within the techno scene. And so if you're seeing the Houthi chants are getting 1 million or 2 million views, they're like, okay, this is a good song to mix in my next track. And yeah, and so this is how holistic and comprehensive they've been in penetrating the society inside and outside of Yemen. Regarding the operational security, the official, I'm not in Israeli reports uh, are claiming that Israel purposely for a year was not targeting personnel to get them comfortable.
Mhm.
And I can't confirm that or not. But if that was the case, then it worked
Mhm.
because in April, when, for example, Abdul Karim al-Houthi, the Minister of Interior, was targeted by U.S. strike, he went underground for 2 months. He reappeared this month, and many other commanders of the 4th MRC and the 6th MRC and the 5th MRC and other MRC, military regional commands of the Houthis started appearing again after being, in the hideout because of U.S. strikes. Because U.S. strikes Trump administration's U.S. strikes were targeting personnel, different from how Biden approached it. And they started getting comfortable and they started coming out, and then the strike happened. And so, that will change the momentum for them. And honestly, we all knew that a lot of these ministers and the prime minister were just symbolic. They're just trying to show the world and the society that we're inclusive. And the one thing the Houthis are, they're non-inclusive. They
Mhm.
want you to believe in everything that they're preaching. And if you're not, you're a traitor, you're a Zionist, you're a spy, you're a mercenary. All the labels that they're using.
So this is fascinating because traditional media portrayal of the Houthis is of fairly primitive, cut-chewing fighters who've become more sophisticated in terms of defense thanks to Iranian and Hezbollah assistance, but culturally speaking, they are fairly unimaginative and fairly um, unsophisticated. Clearly, what you're talking about, the whole of society approach of penetration, this capture of soft power institution, and this public and populist appeal on a cultural level suggests entirely a completely different understanding of the Houthis, which I am not sure is, by the way, even fully comprehended by nearby countries, which you've mentioned, which could explain part of their outreach failure. It suggests that they've also been getting a lot of PR assistance and a lot of soft power and indoctrination, ideological formation assistance from elsewhere. Let's talk a little bit about what that actually means and what that means for any effort to develop effective counter messaging for such a society.
One of the strongest weapon that the Houthis have today is how their enemies undermine them, mock
Mhm.
them, and their inability to be imaginative and their inability to take them serious. I think the maritime strikes changed that perspective because, and you started seeing in US media one of the biggest propaganda tools for the Houthis, unfortunately, became a lot of military brass who were complimenting, that we were fighting the Houthis in the maritime arena, and this is the first time we had intense battles since World War II. The Houthis were the first to use ballistic missiles to target ships. The Houthis were the first to do X, Y, and Z. And so the Houthis were the first to use long range, one way unmanned aerial vehicles to attack Israel, and so on and so on and so on. And so militarily, I think the Houthis have gained the attention of the world. And in fact, um, this is also domestically why the Houthis have a lot of power, and their believers, their followers, believe that their leader is some sort of a divine figure. They were in 2004 besieged in a cave in Sa'da. Their founding father, or one of their founding fathers, Hussein al-Houthi, was killed. Then his brother, 2004, a decade later, 2014, seizes the capital, executes the commander who executed his brother, or was part of the commanders that targeted him, executed their brother, and took over the presidential palace, eventually killing the former president, exiling the current president, and they're just they're in their mindset and how they're promoting is that they're unstoppable, that we're unstoppable.
Mhm.
And in 2024, 20 years later, they're attacking Israel, they're challenging the almighty US Navy, they're attacking carriers, and they're creating this chaos. And so their staunch followers believe in that, oh, we're the chosen people. This is a divine people. But when you look on the ground, and the reality is, and I'll use an example of the Southern Giant Brigades, Brigades that are based in Shabwa and based on the West Coast and in the South. They almost defeated the Houthi in every battle.
Hmm.
The Houthis tried to capture Marib, which is the last remaining stronghold for the Yemen National Army, which is loyal to the international recognized government in Marib. And they tried to capture Marib, and they failed. They tried to push south towards Mocha against the National Resistance Forces led by Tariq Saleh, the vice president of the Presidential Leadership Council, and they failed. So they struggled on the ground to
Hmm.
capture things for now. And and Gaza and October 7 was God sent for them
Hmm.
because people were starting, in 2022, the ceasefire started, and people started saying, hey, it's been 70 months since we got paid. No service provisions. We're not getting promotions. All these tensions and blockades. Why can't we make peace with other Yemeni parties? And then Gaza war comes, and Abdel Malik al-Houthi, he believes, and I think people say that Abdel Malik is using it. No, Abdel Malik believes that he's going to be the liberator of Jerusalem. And that inability by his adversaries to take him serious is what empowers him. Because if you and I had a conversation in 2004, and I'll say, hey, in 20 years, the Houthis are going to kill all these figures, take over the north, attack Israel, attack carriers. You would have thought I was crazy. You would have thought that, you can't take me serious. You're like, and, but it happened, and a lot of these things are self-fulfilling prophecies that they wrote in their Malazim, which is kind of their book. It's the their former founding father, Hussein Houthi's lectures were collected and they formed a book, and it's called Malazims, which is a collection of lectures. So in it, he talks about the Great Red Sea Battle and the American fighting the devil and so on and so on. And so when you have a lot of these events that happen on the ground, the level of the hubris of the Houthis is sky high because they're like, hey, see. But yeah, and so this is part of why we are in this situation today.
Given what you're saying, given how much the international community has underestimated their ability to evolve, both in terms of messaging, in terms of security and defense, and in terms of capturing not only of elites but of entire society, who would be best positioned to develop any outreach or countermeasuring to the northern population? Obviously, the Arab coalition has lost credibility after numerous failures. The West is being deliberately kept out by the Houthis themselves. So, are there any countries, societies, or organizations who be well positioned to develop any sort of bridges to the locals?
You've asked an excellent question because I always say that airstrikes are not going to defeat the Houthis. Foreign boots on the ground are not going to weaken the Houthis. Um, People will argue that military operation, if the Saudi UAE uh, uh, led coalition is revived and with in Israel and the US airstrikes and ISR and intelligence comes in again, and the eight armies, there's like right now there's around eight armies in the anti-Houthi coalition of Yemeni armies that are kind of split in loyalty between the Saudis and the Emiratis. If they all unite and they're gonna push the Houthis, in theory, yes, I would say maybe that will happen, but at a higher price, and there's gonna be a lot of destruction, a lot of civilian casualties. But the fragmentations and the divisions are so deep that the infighting within the anti-Houthi coalition and within the international recognized government of Yemen is difficult at this point to see them unite against the Houthis. And this is another reason why the Houthis are strong today, is because their adversaries are so fragmented due to historic grievances. The 1986 civil war in the south have created a divisions between the western section of the south and the eastern sections of the southwest. It created tensions between those who were former socialists and those who struggled or were punished and demonized and detained and killed by some of these socialists, between the former ruling party, the GPC, and the Muslim Brotherhood and Islahs and the youth activists because of the Arab Spring. So all these conflicts in the north and the south in 94, none of these conflicts were really addressed
Mm-hmm.
historically, and you see their consequences and effects today. This is why you're not able to unite a society. So no one will be able to defeat or counter the Houthis outside of the Yemeni community.
Mm-hmm.
They're not there yet. And for me, as an analyst right now and someone who works in risk advisory and my bread and butter is forecasting, I think the Houthis, you know, it's either two things. It's either you're gonna have an infighting within the Houthi movement, which all empires, all monarchies, all theocracies. It's just that's how it's done. And that's history will teach you that
Mm-hmm.
infighting, especially if Abdel Malik dies or is no longer in the scene, you could have infighting within the group. And then the second thing, which I believe maybe is most likely, uh, the very aggressive nature of the Houthi security police state and the crackdowns and the violence and choking of freedoms and not being fair to the population and labeling anyone who's against them. I mean, last week, the General Secretary of the GPC, the former ruling party, which is their main ally in the north, they, a day after they announced the cancellation of events because of following the Houthi line of because of Gaza and we don't want to support anything outside of Gaza. The next day they detained the general secretary publicly. They could have just called him like, "Hey, come to a security station or a facility. We have some questions." But the fact that they detained him on the street and breaking into so there's this community in the north lives in fear. They also, in this year they started the campaign called Midri, which is I don't know translation for I don't know. And the whole idea of it is if there's strikes, don't post in locations, don't post any info, which the Israelis also use. But with the Yemen, it became another tool that they're using to silence the society. All the top Yemeni YouTubers and influencers on social media who are now promoting the Houthis were detained by the Houthis a few years ago because they said the wrong thing. And so you're not, and it's hard for me as someone who's working on OSEN to, and whenever I want to confirm a lot of the information, people don't talk to me as freely as they did a few years ago. They're afraid. Then they're afraid that the Houthis are monitoring uh, the internet because the main internet provider is under Houthi controlled. The main cell phone providers are under Houthi control. So everybody's just paranoid that the Houthis are watching and everything. And so because of that, there's no space for you to operate an uprising in the Houthis area. There's at least over the past that 10 decade, there's at least 8 tribal uprisings that were violently squashed, and nobody came from the outside world to help them. And so you have to think twice before you go out. Now, you may have situations where there's a complete economic collapse, complete food security dilemma, which will rally the whole society against them. But I'm not seeing those indicators at this point. And a big part of it is there's a lot of pride in what the Houthis are doing for Gaza. A lot of pride within, the Yemeni community is very sympathetic historically to the Palestinian cause, and you see so much support for the Houthis outside of Yemen now because of that, and so yeah.
Would you say they're becoming normalized outside Yemen because of their engagement in this Gaza narrative?
Not just because of that. I think people are confused
Mm-hmm.
about. Yeah, I was watching the Young Turks podcast this week, and they had an emergency podcast, and they're like, Israel killed the Yemeni government, and the prime ministers and nine ministers,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think they realize that there's two governments. There's a de facto Houthi coup d'etat government, and then there's an international recognized government. And so it's just Yemen is not a country that's fairly covered over the years outside of piracy, terrorism,
Mm-hmm.
and now Houthis being part of the Iranian threat network, aka the Axis of Resistance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen the same actually from Israeli sources, not so much recently, but even a few months ago, they were some announcements and threats made by the Houthis were reported as being made by Yemen government. So the
Yes.
level of confusion
Yeah.
among even among analysts
Yeah.
is rather
I mean,
remarkable.
IDF's statements last week, they didn't even know what they hit. They were like, we targeted the Adar power station. There's no Adar power station. And then they corrected it. And then within the third draft, they're like, yeah, it's the Asir electric substation. So even the IDF, which is conducting airstrikes, are not getting the names of the locations and stuff. So it just tells you that the knowledge, even though that this was um, this week's strike will give that impression that that Israel has now sophisticated intelligence in Yemen. I don't think it's at the level of what Israel had with Hezbollah or with Iran because they spent decades working on this. I think Israel is years behind on figuring out the Houthi network and who the Houthis are and is the Houthi a tribe or a family or like is it a religion? Is it a sect? Is it and so there's so many questions about people just confused about who are these guys?
So let's say by some miracle, Israel, or maybe some combination of Israel and Western powers, managed to strike not at just these symbolic technocratic appointees, but at the real core of the military command and control structure. What, in theory, would happen then? What kind of failover mechanisms do the Houthis have for taking over during a real emergency? Do they have clerical authorities? Do they have tribal brokers that would assist in the event senior cadres are actually removed?
They are running the country today as a theocratic royal family.
Mm-hmm.
Abdul Malik al-Houthi is the supreme leader. He's the revolution that his official title or how he likes to be called is the leader of the revolution. Um, his brother has a lot of titles that a lot of Muslims will find offensive. Like the aid to the Quran or the spoken Quran or the fraternal. Kind of like just equating them to this hot level of not a prophet, but almost there. Not the word of God, but very close to there. Like, your knowledge in Quran is very limited. So instead of reading Quran, read the malazims. It's a better explanation to you because it's more, you don't have those skills to talk about the scripture. So you got to read how I write, and which is very common throughout all the sects.
Mm-hmm.
And so the de facto vice president is his cousin Muhammad Ali al-Houthi, who's a member of the Supreme Political Council. His brother is the most powerful figure within the military establishment in the north. Abdel Khaliq al-Houthi, Abu Yunus. He commands the Central Regional Command, which is the capital and areas around it, commander of the Republican Guards, and maybe the unofficial commander also of the missile brigades. Then you have his nephew, Ali, who is the deputy. Minister of Interior for Intelligence and Security. Then you have Abdul Karim Al Houthi, who is his uncle, the Minister of Interior. Till recently, his brother Yahya was the Minister of Education, who was changed all the curriculum for the to the indoctrinations of the Houthis to the point where characters in kids' school books, characters and shapes, they did shapes of people that looked like their slain leader. So just brainwashing the kids to recognize that the Hussein al-Houthi's face and features is the holy guy. And so you see his face all over in his books. So you're brainwashed. And so this whole generation of, every summer, 200 to 300,000 are going through these camps. But with the admission of the Houthis themselves, because of Gaza and the perception that we're under attack, which they are now. I mean, Israel is attacking them, the US is attacking them. Since October 7th, the Houthis have pushed around over 1 million Yemenis through their indoctrination general mobilization programs, which includes scripture, ideology, cultural, and military practicing, and it's similar to the Iranian besiege. So the redundancy within the society is so if you kill Abdul Malik or you kill some of the members, their structure is very strong. Yes, like you saw this week after the Israeli strike that some of their messaging was kind of off, and they got caught off guard, but their security establishment is very well entrenched, and their loyalists and base is very loyal, and the opposition is weak within their areas. If
Mhm.
and the silent majority will continue to be silent, and the government and the anti-Houthi coalition in Yemen, were after 10 years, everybody just accepted this new reality, and there's a sort of one of the reasons why the Houthis took over the capital is they were not happy with the restructuring of the federal system. But now you have in Yemen a federal system where the liberated areas, the non-Houthi areas, are sort of running their own thing, and there's two Yemens now. I mean, two currency exchange rates, two central banks, two governments, two Yemen TVs, two Yemen news agencies, two Yemen Daily Thawra and Al Jumhuriya and 14th of October newspapers, two Yemen radio stations. So if you're not a Yemen expert, and you will turn on and you're like, oh, this is Yemen. And there's a funny example that just happened this week where the killed Houthi foreign minister sent a cable to the UN to request that the UN envoy to be removed. And a lot of officials there thought that this was from the internationally recognized government, but it wasn't because it had the seal, it had the name. And so what I mean is it's confusing. It's confusing if you're not really on top of like trying to figure out who's who. So so yes, so there is I am actually working on a piece right now for this is basically the succession plan for the Houthis. And from my initial research is the main reason why the Houthis will continue being the Houthis is because it's an idea, it's an ideology, and there's no counter ideology, no counter idea, and there's no strong counter movement to counter them. There's no counterbalance right now. So even if they collapse, if their leadership is killed, who's gonna come? Who's gonna be the rescuer? That's not present at this moment.
Grant, that infighting, as you mentioned, actually became something unmanageable and beyond the current low level of skirmishes. What indicators would tell you that the movement, that the Ansar Allah is fragmenting the North versus consolidating around a smaller and harder core, as sometimes happens with such things?
I think the first one would be if they start arresting their key leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that will be the main indicator. But other than that, if we spoke a couple of years ago, I would have said if there's a tribal uprising, or if there's a shortage in fuel, or a shortage of food, or a shortage of bad service provisions, or so all of those happened, and they're still in power. So
Mm-hmm.
they're entrenched and they're resilient. Um, and I'm not trying here to say
Mm-hmm.
that the internationally recognized government of Yemen is to be blamed. It's just the internationally recognized government of Yemen represents different groups that don't see eye to eye. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just, it's easy to say, oh, let's blame President Rashad Al Alimi, the president of the Presidential Leadership Council. Let's blame his vice presidents. It's more complicated than that. Like, they're they're different groups with different goals, different aspirations, different values, different strategies, and just to let so far they're doing an okay job. You're seeing some positive indicators in Aden this week. The exchange rate from Yemeni Riyal went from 2,900 under the former Prime Minister Ahmed Awad bin Mubarak. The currency was almost, the exchange rate was over 2,000. Public schools where there were strikes. This month, you see the currency exchange rate go from 2,900 to 900. You're seeing public schools reopened, security is stabilized. So there are, not everything is bad, but it's just fascinating to see how people throughout are just resilient and they live, and Gaza is always an example for me, someone who worked a decade in
Mm-hmm.
food security, is people survive some way, somehow. It's a struggle, but
Mm-hmm.
people always figure out, we don't give people credit and humans credit and how resilient and how adaptive they are to survive.
So moving on to kind of the theater of maritime operations from these ground-based strikes. Um, you mentioned an area, a strategic area called the Kill Triangle. Let's talk about that. What are its vertices? Which sensors and shooters give it keys? And how do the Houthis manage deconfliction with the regular maritime traffic that whenever they're not targeting it inside that zone?
Um, that answer will be a work in progress. I am not sure. And I have to say that, one of my viral moments, working with media over 2 decades was when the Houthis took over Sana'a in September 21. And I gave a comment to the press that I have no idea what's going on. And that comment became a viral comment by itself. And so there's a lot of questions, on how are they able to target moving sailing ships with anti ballistic ships
Mhm.
with ballistic missiles, the anti-ship ballistic missiles or anti-ship cruise missiles, the ASCMs and ASBMs, or with the UAVs. There's reporting out there that they're getting commercial satellite uh, services from Chinese company, that the Russians are helping them, that the Iranians have floating forward operating bases that's helping them with targeting, or that the Houthis have developed their own capabilities. It could be all of the above, but it's difficult to say that. The one thing I would be comfortable saying is that the Houthis are not doing this alone.
Mhm.
Um, the Houthis can survive without Iran today, but the Houthis cannot build or assemble, more like the correct term will be assemble. The Houthis are not able to assemble and launch missiles without Iranian technology. And anyone who doubted the Iranian components are coming A to Z from Iran, you see this month, last month, the National Resistance Forces seized a ship which had everything for the missiles, from the fins, the engines, the ISR equipment, even to the screw level, the the fuselage, everything comes from Iran. Now with drones, I think the Houthis are able to build drones without Iran. They're using the Chinese markets. We could debate, is the Chinese government allowing the Houthis um, or furnishing these components to the Houthis? I would say the Chinese government, especially now at these points with a lot of these seizures, are aware that the Houthis are getting dual usage components to build drones from China. And it makes sense why the Chinese will, with all the challenge between the US and the South China Sea and Taiwan,
Mm-hmm.
that the Chinese wouldn't mind the Houthis giving the Americans a hard time. The Russians, with what's happening in Ukraine, wouldn't mind giving the Americans a hard time in the Red Sea. Iran is now seeing the Houthis as the tip of the spear for the Axis of Resistance. So they're 2 years, 3 years ago, we were seeing first, second generations of weapons. Now we see missiles that are showcased in April of this year, and a few months later, they're already in Houthis' hands. So they're getting the best kits from the Houthis. So the kill zone and the triangle kill zone, I just mapped out the from the UK, the United Kingdom's, the UK TMO office, their locations of the direct hits and sunken ships, and it formed a triangle uh, area. So it's like the Bermuda Triangle with all the conspiracy theories, but this is a triangle within the Red Sea. It's 30, the closest is 30, 40 miles off the Hadida shore, and it goes all the way to 90 miles. And it seems that, and we've seen videos with the sinking of the Eternity Sea, how precise are these Houthi cruise and anti-ship missiles. Um,
Now, I'm going to ask something a little bit provocative, and if you don't know the answer, it's okay. But you may have heard that the US government decided to terminate cybersecurity operations against uh, Russian targets, and they've terminated intelligence sharing with European partners. To what extent do you think that will affect the cybersecurity situation around Houthi controlled areas, given the role of the Russians in sharing intel and cyber techniques and with the Houthis?
yeah, I think President Trump and the Trump administration is very clear about their foreign policy. Their foreign policy is America first. So they're
Mm-hmm,
not investing in external conflicts. They're not investing in dealing with external problems in the region, like the Biden and and the Obama administrations, all the previous administrations. And this is the ticket that Trump supporters voted for. A lot of people just are fed up with the Ukraine war, with the Middle East war, with all these conflicts. And so they want that money that's being invested for cybersecurity or missile or wars or deploying troops to be invested in the US in fixing the problems here in the US. So that's not a surprise. I don't
mm-hmm,
have specific details about which program was shut down and from which department, but the government size is shrinking. The layoffs are most likely going to be closer to 250,000, if not more, by the end of the Trump administration's. Cuts are throughout. I mean, within the National Security Council in the White House, within the Department of Defense, within at the agency levels, USAID is shutting down, department shut down, and the Department of Education maybe will be shutting down. So the government is shrinking, budgets are shrinking, spending on um, foreign wars and foreign conflicts is shrinking. Regarding the cybersecurity and the role in Yemen, I think right now, from the perception of the administration, is that the Houthis stopped attacking American ships.
mm-hmm,
U.S. Navy ships are able to sail
mm-hmm,
through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and that was the red line that the administration were lobbying for, and they got it. And
mm-hmm.
what's happening between Israel and the Houthis, I think there's a belief here in the city that the Israelis are going to manage it, with the U.S. support, but they're going to manage the Houthis. They're going to manage the regional adversaries. And so, um, yeah, I hope that I sort of, answered this question.
So, in
best
terms
of my
of the
knowledge. Yeah.
targeting of other non-American ships, has there been any changes in targeting cycles since late spring? Are there any faster sensor-to-shooter loops, any reliable AIS spoof detection, or bolder rules of engagement, or is it pretty much the same?
It's all of the above. I mean, I think the Houthis have targeted the Russian ships, they've targeted Chinese ships, they've wounded Russian
Mhm,
sailors most recently. And so even though they're Ambry today's attack in the past 24 hours is the most recent attack. Ambry says that even though the shipping companies is based in Singapore, but Ambry saying that this is linked to Israel. And so the definition the definition of the Houthis of what is an Israeli linked ship is widening
mhm,
uh, now compared to where we were 2 years ago. And so you could imagine if a board member is Israeli, they could say this is an Israeli linked company. They're saying that if a shipping company uh, or if a company is dealing with a shipping company that's doing business with Israel, that could be a target. They're saying that a shipping company whose ships are going to Israel, even though they're not going through the Red Sea directly to Israel, but like kind of like the Greek ships. So a lot of the Greek ships were targeted because their mother companies or their owners have other companies that are doing business with Israel. So the target list is huge.
mhm.
Um, and I think initially it was easy for the Houthis to target these ships because if you go online and you see the port authorities in Israel, you will see all the ships that are coming in, coming out, inbound, outbound, and so it was easy to formulate those targets. But I think after um, almost 2 years of doing this, the Houthis are getting better with figuring out what's coming in, what's coming out. But we're seeing less and less Israeli-linked ships going through the Red Sea, and less companies are taking those risks because of the Houthis. So the Houthis, in a way, have been successful in restricting the movement of the ships of the shipping companies going through the Red Sea. But we saw earlier this year that Zim, which is one of the largest shipping companies in Israel, was actually making the money. We're making more money. Their stock went up. Their owners were killing it financially in a good way because what the Houthis created is that the demand and the cost went up. So shipping companies are making money.
Mhm.
And the number one victim of the Houthi maritime operations are the Egyptians in the Suez Canal. It's not the Israelis, it's the Egyptians.
Mhm.
Because all the other companies figured out that you could go through around Africa or you go through the land border, the land corridor from UAE to Saudi all the way to Jordan and beyond. That things will be slow, things will be uh, delayed, but it will work. It will come. And same thing with the shipping company. It's resilient and it adjusted. And the whole idea that, if you shut down the Red Sea, it's the end of the world. We realize now it is not the end of the world. And so that's one of the long-term consequences of what the Houthis have done is they've actually lowered the importance from a strategic choke point all over the global world for the Red Sea.
So, there then a realistic ceiling of Houthi anti-ship capability over the next year or so, if we keep in mind inventory, Iranian resupply pathway, battle damage to launch infrastructure, and all these other challenges.
Yeah. So just to give you an idea, the latest National Resistance Forces seizure, that ship this year conducted over 15 smuggling operation, and they were part of a group that did eight more. So the flow. uh, is very steady from Iran. And now that Iran is not able, doesn't have a GLOC or ground lines of communications to uh, Syria from via Iraq, so Iran, Iraq, Syria to Hezbollah. So now they're redirecting more things to the Houthis. We do see every once in a while when there's a decline for example, during the U.S. campaign, there was a clear decline in the anti-ship ballistic missiles, but there
Mm-hmm.
was a steady firing and launches of drones. So it seems that the Houthi drone assembly lines are producing in high quantities. And we saw to a lesser extent, that they were still able to fire the smaller, less sophisticated, perhaps, the anti-ship cruise missiles. But that's the million-dollar question of like how many missiles and components the Houthis have. And that's a challenge because in Iran, for example, you could track because the bases are visible. So there's bases and factories to produce missiles and fuels, and you know where they are. Everything about the Houthi regime is decentralized. The warhead will be in one location, the fuselage is another location, and the engine is another location. They put it together. It's on a truck. They fire, forget. And so it's not. Nothing is in one place. Everything's distributed. So it's very difficult to figure out where they are, what they have, and how, and
Mm-hmm.
and what's the stockpile. It's the one thing for sure. It's growing, and then and that's because of Iran.
So now, among all these really serious things, and what you said about the Houthi propaganda machinery and their ability to effectively use the attacks against them to their advantage, there comes something strange that caught my attention. Abdul Malik al-Houthi's 98th um, sermon addressing the U.S. furry community. And on the one hand, sure. Yeah. On the one hand, there seems to be this underscores what you said about the pop culture sophistication and the ability to track open societies, which people often forget about. But on the other hand, it's a very specific and very niche thing to address. So, what is the significance of that?
Well, I think the first significance is he talks weekly, so he runs out of talking points. So he needs to continue to come up with things to show that America is bad and the West is a horrible society and the culture. And yeah, trust me, I had to repeat that segment two, three times because I was like, what? Because he was like, in the West, like, men and women dress up as dogs, and and I'm like, excuse me, I'm like, and so initially, you will think, oh, this is funny that he's doing that, but it's not, it just shows that they're doing their work. They're doing their
Hmm.
work, and they keep on looking on things that will alienate the local society. And so if you see the local society in Yemen kind of like, oh, like Americans dress as animals and walk around and party looking like animals, acting like dogs. Like, what kind of society is that? That's not what I want. I don't want their democracy. I don't want their furry culture. I don't want their music. I don't, and, and so it's very calculated. It's very strategic, but it just shows you how, uh, the counter messaging and trying to figure out what they're doing is very minimum in the West.
Now, we have seen that the Houthis, on the one hand, are expanding their relationship base. In, it's not just Iran and Hezbollah anymore, and or even Oman next door. It's also the Russians, the Chinese, capitalizing on the great power competition and current tensions and the war in Ukraine, and also even other terrorist organizations, Al Shabaab and so forth. But so, but all of these dynamics are fairly predictable in terms of being in line and consistent with the Houthi ideology, their methods, their aims, objectives, and general dynamics and whole thing, these sort of things. We can, looking at the map, we can sort of understand why these relationships come about. On the other hand, you have also shifting dynamics in parts of the region that could be um, shaping the region in a different way, which is what we noted recently about Saddam Haftar's inspection of Turkish ships and the general rapprochement between Ankara and eastern Libya, which has not up until this point been particularly Turkish friendly, and vice versa. What is going on there? Why is Turkey suddenly courting their former enemies? Why is Eastern Libya opening up to that relationship? How do the Russians that have been securitizing the Haftar strongholds up until this point feel about it? And what does that mean for regional dynamics for the maritime sector in that area?
Yes. So in Libya, the situation today is calm. The East and the West are eating from the same dish and
Mm-hmm,
they're sharing the cake. They're splitting the oil revenues, even though the most of the population is in the West and there's a smaller population in the East and the South where Haftar control. But it seems that there's a gentleman's agreement and the current situation in Libya is serving all the elites.
mm-hmm,
It's serving the government in Tripoli, it's serving the government in Benghazi. And I'm not seeing indicators anytime soon that another war will erupt.
mm-hmm,
The West is already dealing with a lot of security challenges with the prime minister trying to cement his power and deassemble all the different armed factions and in the east it seems that Haftar has solidified his power over the armed forces there. And what does that mean? That means that there is, because Libya is a very oil-rich country, and Libya has resources inside or outside of Libya that is good for business. And so this is why you're seeing Haftar's in Washington D.C. and
mm-hmm,
Haftar is comfortable enough to publicly name his son as the vice commander of the Libyan armed forces and his other son to be the general chief of staff of the army is because they're not feeling threatened because
mm-hmm,
the all the people will say that the people in the West they're saying, oh, we're democratic, we're not as corrupt, and then people in the East will say, no, you're Islamists and you
mm-hmm,
have your own way of corruption, and we're countering you, we're finding you. At the end of the day, they're all making money and
mm-hmm,
they're all benefiting financially tremendously from the Libyan oil wealth. So, Turkey has a market to export,
mm-hmm,
has industries to export, and Libya is a market. And as long as they're not going to be fighting, why not expand that market? And the same thing, I think the US, the Trump administration with its business first um, versus war first mentality. They're seeing opportunities where oil companies, US oil companies, some of the money that could be unfreezed
mm-hmm,
uh, for the Libyans could be invested in the US. It could be invested and in Libya and so on. And so nothing should surprise you these days when it comes to international politics. And Russia's busy with Ukraine. And
mm-hmm,
we already saw that with the collapse of the Assad regime. I think if it wasn't for the Ukraine war, I think Bashar al-Assad would have still been the president by now. But because Russia was just so, occupied with the war in Ukraine, that it's harder for them to focus on the peripheries and to showcase their aspirations of being a great power.
Now we are seeing that it seems from what you tell me that actually Ankara is the big winner, geopolitically speaking, even though everybody else is fine with making money from Turkish perspective, being able to project greater influence into parts and areas where they were previously not established before, is going to be is going to be an issue.
Yes.
But what does it mean? What does it mean for for the region as a whole? If Turkey creates manages to unify its influence and expand its influence in Libya, if it plays a greater role uh, um, in the maritime sector there, does it facilitate Turkey's outreach to, for instance, Yemen? Because in the past, at least, they have shown interest in some level of involvement in Yemen, and they've established some training camps. They've worked with some Muslim Brotherhood components. Does that mean that they will either clash or join forces with some of the local alliances?
Yeah. So in Yemen, uh, you could tell the Houthis uh, are not fans of Turkish government
Mhm,
because one of the first things they did when they took over the capital in September 2014 is they took down the Turkish memorial.
mm,
And and to them they see the Turks as supporting the Islah Party, which is an umbrella of conservative tribes, Muslim Brotherhood, etc., etc. And so a lot of the Muslim Brotherhood leaning TV stations for Yemen and journalists are based in Turkey. And Turkey today is housing,
mhm,
sorry, and Turkey is housing a lot of Turkey is housing a lot of Islamist-leaning Yemeni opposition, but it's also good business. You could see that Yemenis are, within the top five expat communities in Turkey that it's buying up properties, investing in properties.
mm,
A lot of Yemenis utilize the whole um, deal of, if you buy property, you could become a Turkish national. So there's a lot of Yemeni Turks now who are, have Turkish
mm,
passports. Yes. And so um, I don't see the Houthis to be open to a bigger Turkish role, even as a track to diplomacy
mm,
or as a peace broker. I think that will continue to be within the periphery of Iraq and the Sultanate of Oman
mhm,
for the time being. But things could switch. I mean, Iran could, eventually use Turkey's influence over some of the Islamist-leaning factions, especially those who were active with the Arab Spring movement, to do that.
mm, mhm.
But not
Yeah,
anytime
that's
soon.
yeah. I just find it very interesting because it seems to be a kind of a natural trajectory if Turkey continues expanding across Africa the way it does. It's
Yes,
and it already has established strong influence in Somalia, for
yes.
instance, and it makes sense for it to continue consolidating if they can. Why not?
And
Nobody's
that's
stopping them.
and that's a good way for us ending today is both Houthis and Turkey now are competing in Somalia. So Houthi military technology, drones, and weapons um, are flowing into Somalia, and Turkish weapons are flowing into Somalia. And so uh, I never thought that the time will come where you will hear Somali politicians complain about Houthi influence, damaging influence in Somalia, which will attract the Israelis, will attract the US, will bring in the Russians and the Chinese and the Turks. And so they're both competing, and that's the thing is like they're both not aligned in who they're supporting, the Turks and the Houthis in Somalia.
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, especially considering that again, Al-Shabaab has been forming tangential alliances with Houthis on the other hand. U.S. has been limiting its strikes on kind of some of the terrorist organizations, but not really dealing with the geopolitics of there. And of course, the Israelis just don't want the expansion of terrorist organizations, but can they really compete with Turkish influence given the amount of money Turkey is investing there? That's very questionable.
Yeah.
China might, but Israel, might be there just for the security interest. So it's very interesting what may happen in the near future, especially if Houthis continue globalizing at the rate that they are and continuing becoming less of a what people see as militias or quote unquote rebels and more as a growing paramilitary quasi-governmental um, organized force.
Yeah.
So that is an open subject that I think is worth highlighting. Thank you so much for joining us today for these
You're
very
welcome.
interesting topics and insights. And of course, for those watching us, we'll be back next week, Tuesday night, 9 p.m. The Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great
Thank you
evening.
so much.